Pop Psych, and here's why. It stands for popular psychology, and through YouTube, I will become popular, and I'll be a popular psychologist. I'm David Colarosi. No, it's Dr. David Colarosi. I have a master's degree in marriage and family therapy and a PhD in counseling psychology.
You are such a genius.
So last week was a rough one for Shia LaBeouf. His ex-girlfriend, FKA Twigs, came out and filed a lawsuit against him for relentlessly abusing her over the course of their relationship. She said that he had been physically abusive at times, sexually assaulted her, even intentionally gave her an STD, just globally emotionally abusive. One of the examples she gave was him hopping in a car and just driving recklessly, taking off his seatbelt and threatening to kill himself unless she professed her undying love to him. But in Twig's eyes, the relationship started off strong. They met 2018 on the set of Honey Boy, and when the movie wrapped, within 2 weeks, Shia was professing his undying love for her. They were very overt about their affection, and then I think it was only 3 months later that he convinced her to move into his house with him and not go home to the UK. But then the relationship sort of progressed in a more negative way. Eventually, it derailed emotionally. He became more abusive, and Twigs was unable to get out. And I think it took her about a year and a half to get out of the relationship. And Twigs is suing him now because she wants to make the point to the public that domestic violence can happen to anyone. She was a very well-resourced, very confident, very well-supported woman that could have taken a flight to London at the drop of a hat and been out of the relationship. But because he was so abusive and so controlling, she didn't feel like she had the power to do so. In fact, she tried several times, but was fearful about what would happen if she left him. Now, if you've watched this channel before, you know that I take events in popular culture and use them to talk about psychological issues or principles or ideas or whatever. Today, I want to talk about domestic violence, and I'm going to use the example of Shia LaBeouf. But know that I'm talking about a situation like this. I don't know whether or not Shia LaBeouf engaged in these behaviors or not. He has apologized for some things and outright denied other things. So we really don't know. These are just accusations at this point. So that being said, let's talk about Shia. He grew up in a super chaotic household. His dad was a bad alcoholic, a drug addict. There's even a story of his dad taking Shia to an AA meeting during his childhood. Growing up, Shia was always aware of the fact that his family had no money. At one point, I guess, a family member almost adopted Shia because Shia's parents couldn't take care of him anymore financially. And at a very early age, Shia was responsible for supporting his parents, who eventually divorced due to money issues. So that sounds like a total nightmare to me, but when Shia reflects on his childhood, a childhood which he admits gave him PTSD, he still says, loving family, positive childhood. And today, Shia is an alcoholic. He reports that he has PTSD. He's been arrested numerous times, and he's engaged in all kinds of performance art that is super bizarre. And he's also exceptionally talented, very successful, clearly a smart guy, incredibly charismatic, high EQ, right? All these characteristics that helped him survive that nightmarish childhood. Now, the New York Times and other media outlets have picked up this story, and they're describing it as an example of the cycle of abuse, which is why I want to talk about this today. I hate the idea of the cycle of abuse. I think the model is terrible. It's very simple. It's been around since, so first of all, it's super outdated. It's been around since the 1970s, and there's very little data to support it. But the model is simple. There is an initial honeymoon phase in which the abuser is intentional about manipulating the victim, gaining control over the victim, and then progressively moving the relationship forward and finding ways to isolate the victim. And as that isolation occurs, the victim becomes more and more dependent and tensions rise. And eventually, at some point, tensions overflow and there's an abusive event. At that point, the abuser says, I'm sorry, and tries to reconcile the relationship. The reconciliation happens, right? There's forgiveness, and the cycle starts again. They're back into that honeymoon phase where they forget that anything bad happened, and the relationship progresses like that, right? Just cycles around and around and around. So I don't like this model for a few reasons. The first is it's totally outdated. The model's been around since the 1970s, and there's very little research to support it. And there are good, empirically validated models that we could use. My second issue is I just don't like the language. It implies that the woman or the person that's being abused is responsible for breaking the cycle of violence. Like we need to put more pressure on them to break the cycle as opposed to focusing on the abuser. And then my last issue is I think it oversimplifies the mentality or the psychology of the abuser. It suggests that abusers enter the relationship with the intention of being abusive. And I've worked with perpetrators of domestic violence before, and I've never felt that they entered the relationship with the intention of being abusive, right? The abuse happens later when things spin out of control. Take someone like Shia, for example. He grew up in a trauma-filled, chaotic, unstable environment. I mean, his parents almost gave him away at one point. And yet, when he reflects on his childhood, he reports that it was good and his parents were loving, right? He's unable to connect the idea that he didn't have a good childhood. He wants it to have been a good childhood. If you take that guy who is now alcohol dependent, who now has PTSD, if you take that guy and put him into a relationship, do you think he wants to be an abuser in that relationship? Absolutely not. His goal is to have a stable and healthy relationship. But he doesn't know how to do it. He wasn't taught from his family how to have a healthy relationship. So he engages in it in a very maladaptive manner. So I haven't met Shia, but the behaviors he describes in himself, the behaviors the media picks up, Twigs' comments about him fit the borderline personality disorder model really, really well. People that have borderline personality disorder adapt that they adopt that behavior because it's adaptive. If I need you to love me, I can go about it in a healthy way, which will take a long time and require me to trust you, it require patience, or I can be super intense, super aggressive, and demand that you love me right now. And if you think about the arc of their relationship and Shia's behavior in that relationship, it very much follows that all-in, all-out behavior. So for example, the relationship started really strong, and he was really overt about his love and affection for her. And later on in the relationship, when the relationship started to spin out of control, right, he became very aggressive and controlling, like, don't leave me, love me, I need you to love me, be stable. And when he didn't feel Twigs was being stable, it created a great deal of distress for him. The response is to get very reactive and very negative, all on, all off. He's not intending to be abusive, he's intending to hold the relationship together. So it's like, I guess I want to be really clear to say, I get that the behavior is bad, but I want people to understand what's going on psychologically. And psychologically, we're very nuanced. This is a guy that doesn't know how to hold the relationship together. And if you were to say to him, hey, Shia, you're being controlling right now, he would be embarrassed by it. He would be ashamed by it. He's not going, I want to find a way to control Twigs. Right? He just doesn't know what else to do. He doesn't have the skills to be healthy in a relationship, which is why they always say if someone's an abuser in one relationship, they're likely to abuse in another. So that's kind of a convoluted description, but I just want to make the point that it's oversimplified to just say, abusers intentionally isolate you, then they abuse you, and then they're going to get you to forgive them, and then just so that they can abuse you again, like it's this sort of malicious, cold, calculated process. That's not what it really looks like. And it's important to me for a couple of reasons. First, I hate the idea that we bucket humans who are so nuanced and complicated. I hate when we say, these people are this way. We oversimplify. And in the case of domestic violence, I think oversimplifying is a real problem because it makes someone who's abused, it makes it really easy for them to look at the perpetrator that's hurting them and say, well, that person isn't really that way. I know this person's a good person, so they don't really fit the cycle of violence or cycle of abuse model, so I must not really be a victim of domestic violence. So if you want to learn more about domestic violence, I would suggest you check out the National Domestic Violence Hotline. I'll put a link below. There's current information on there, and I think that would be really helpful. So I appreciate you listening to me rant at the end there. Have a good holiday, and I'll see you in a week.